Before I introduce today's guest, our sponsor of the podcast is The Great Courses. As you know, I've made a couple of these courses myself, one on Skepticism 101, the other on conspiracy theories, and the teaching company has made the courses available through a subscription service. So you can do this, access through this online on your computer on many different platforms. The one I'm telling you about here today is just an app, The Great Courses Plus. You just touch on it like that, it opens right up. I just queued up this course here, Introduction to Psychology, since I deal with a lot of psychology authors here on this podcast. And just to give you an idea, you just scroll through the different lectures. This particular course has 36 30-minute lectures. And so you have access to any of the courses that are on the platform, hundreds and hundreds of courses, each of which has a dozen to 2 dozen, 3 dozen, even sometimes 4 dozen lectures, each 30 minutes long. And that's enough to fill the next 10 years of your commutes and workouts and doing chores and hikes and walks and so forth. It's a great way to do it. So if you do it, access the Great Courses Plus through my podcast. You get a free trial and a 20% discount for the year. So you go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/Shermer. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/Shermer to get the free trial and the 20% discount. I highly recommend it. I listen to these courses all the time. As you know, audio content is part of my job, but you can make it part of your life, and it's a great way to do it. So again, thegreatcoursesplus.com/Shermer. My guest today is Andy Norman. He directs the Humanism Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University, and he studies how ideologies short-circuit minds and corrupt moral understanding, and develops tools that help people think together in more fruitful ways. He's done research on the evolutionary origins of human reasoning and the norms that make dialogue fruitful. He works to clarify the foundations of responsible thinking about what matters and likes to engage audiences on topics related to science and human values. His new book, I just have the bound galley here, is titled Mental Immunity: Infectious Ideas, Mind, Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. A nice forward from Steve Pinker. And so we discuss this very idea. This, how do you know which are the good ideas and which are the bad ideas that your mental immune system should be screening out? Okay, so that gets to the question of epistemology. How do we know it's true? And so we cover the whole range: physical ideas, physics, biology, social sciences, politics, religion, and various specific issues like the abortion issue, immigration, things like this. How are we supposed to know which are the right ideas that we should allow in, or the bad ideas that our immune system should screen out? So we spent a lot of time talking about that. And then we talk about cultural immune systems and the 6 immune disruptive ideas, the kinds of things that interrupt your immune system from protecting you from bad ideas. Then we go through his 12-step program about adopting a more flexible mental attitude that strengthens your mental immune system and makes you less susceptible to bad ideas. And then at the end, we talk about belief and what it means to believe things, and to what extent humans are by nature gullible and will believe anything, or are we by nature skeptical and we tend not to believe things? And so, as you know, this is one of my pet topics here. And so he gives us his views on that. And just as a reminder, the podcast is overall supported by the Skeptic Society. That is, it's under the umbrella of the nonprofit that I direct. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you go to skeptic.com/donate, you can make a donation to support the society, which also supports the podcast. And that keeps us, in the green, so to speak, in the black. Anyway, so if you get a chance to do that, really appreciate your support. And now I give you Andy Norman. Thanks for coming on the show. Your new book is Mental Immunity: Infectious Ideas, Mind, Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. And it's great to meet you in person. I love your bookcase, by the way. I see Glick's Chaos. I see a couple of Pinker books. It looks like a Noah Harari, and there's a Shermer book on there. Okay, you passed the test. There's two Shermer. Yes, there we go. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. You're the one. Okay.
No, yeah, right. No, I've
Uh,
been an admirer of your work for a long time,
oh,
Mike.
well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. So for my listeners who don't know much about you, give us a little potted biography of how you came, your upon your career as an epistemologist. Do you have to go to medical school for that? What is that? and and
Yeah.
then kind of walk us through what that means and your training and how you came to write this book.
Yeah. So in college, it was in one of these all-night dorm bull sessions, right, in college, when some friends of mine and I were all kind of kvetching. I think I was kvetching more than anybody else about our species' sorry lack of wisdom. And one of my buddies says, "Well, why don't you do something about it?" And I, I thought about it, and I realized, gee, maybe I could actually help my fellow. Maybe I could try to get a little clearer myself on what wisdom is and how one might acquire it. And if I actually stumble across anything useful in that domain, maybe I can share it with others. So I declared my philosophy major within the week and ended up specializing in epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy devoted to understanding how we know things and how we can reason and think better.
Right, and that's what your new book is about. Is well, focusing on bad ideas, but to discern those, you have to know what are good ideas and therefore justifiable
Exactly.
knowledge. Um, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I often think of probably the most common popular version of what you do would be the riff on the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. Donald Rumsfeld's epistemology. He kind
Yes.
of made epistemology famous with his little press briefing there, where he talked about there's things we
Oh,
know that we know, and then there's things we know that we don't know. But the big ones, of course, I think he was
yes.
talking about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Is just what we don't know that we don't know. What else could be out there?
I, I don't I don't think of Donald Rumsfeld as a fellow epistemologist, I'm afraid.
But it does kind of nicely outline, the problem that we face. There's very many
Yeah.
things that we don't know that we don't even know. And but before we get into all that, because that could lead us down the path of free will and determinism and why there's something rather than nothing and all that, I think my entry into your book, really reading your book, enlightened me on another problem I've thought long about when we started the Skeptic
Mm-hmm.
um, magazine in 1992, and I befriended
Mm-hmm.
Martin Gardner, who's kind of one of the patriarchs of the modern skeptical movement. He had that column in Scientific American, and he, along with James Randi and Paul Kurtz and Ray Hyman and a few others, started the Psychop and Skeptical Inquirer, and then we came along about 15 years later. But
Okay.
one of the surprising things about that was that Martin, these are all everybody's an atheist. They're all atheists, just almost a given. That atheism
Yeah.
is a tantamount to being a skeptic. Well, Martin was not an atheist, and he said he was a fideist, and he got this from William James and Miguel
Mm-hmm.
Unamuno in a pragmatic philosophy, in which now you can't apply this to everything. You can't just say it works for me, so I can believe whatever I want. He was not that
Right.
indiscriminate, but that certain issues, the God issue, free will determinism. So just take that one. You can't determine
Mm-hmm.
whether we're free or determined. You guys, professional philosophers, are conflicted about this. So it's okay if I
Yeah.
just have a useful fiction in my brain. I believe I'm free. I don't care what you say. I am free. I'm just going to assume that's true. And he applied that to God
Okay.
as well. And he even said, Martin famously said, the atheists have slightly better arguments than the theists, but I'm a theist anyway, or a fideist. And not a personal God
Interesting.
necessarily, but there could be a personal God. It's just something else out there. And that kind of rocked
Mm-hmm.
the atheist movement, like, but he's our hero, and he's saying, what's he saying? And is that
Yeah.
justified?
Yeah. So there's a chapter in my book where I talk about a famous debate between two philosophical titans. One was actually trained as a physicist. His name was William Clifford. This is a guy who saw general relativity coming 45 years before Einstein's famous paper on the subject. He made one contribution to philosophy. He tells a story of a ship owner who is plagued by doubts that his ship is not seaworthy. And these doubts make him miserable and make him reflect on how much he would have to invest to get it shipshape again. And so he suppresses these doubts, and he ignores the evidence that the ship is actually pretty rickety. And he allows hundreds of immigrants to board it and cross the Atlantic. And on one of those travels across the Atlantic, the ship sinks and all aboard perish. And the question Clifford invites us to ask is, did this ship owner believe irresponsibly? And I've taught this essay to thousands of students, and almost all of them basically say, yeah, he believed in a way that was not okay morally. The essay was called "The Ethics of Belief." I'm remembering now. So Clifford is basically saying that, we like to talk a lot about our right to believe things, but we talk very little about what constitutes responsible believing and where those responsibilities might override our cognitive rights. So he makes a case that faith is actually an irresponsible indulgence. That religious faith in particular involves helping yourself to the short-term psychological benefits of, say, belief in God. But because you're defying evidential norms, you're actually exacting a price on humanity more generally by defying an evidentiary norm which serves humanity very well. So that was the original contribution to the debate. Some 20 years later, William James, the Harvard psychologist, comes along and he castigates Clifford for trying to regulate our lives and our thinking with evidential norms. And he basically argues that, hey, if a belief can instill me with hope, or give me courage, or forestall despair, I should be allowed to believe that, even if it means defying evidential norms. So Clifford was focused on the upstream evidence for beliefs and saying that you have to have enough of it. And James was saying, no, as long as the belief has downstream causal consequences that benefit us, it can be okay. And so what I do in the book is say that both men were pointing to irrelevant considerations. Upstream evidence matters, the way Clifford insisted, but the downstream consequences of our beliefs matter also. And I think by acknowledging both of these truths, we can actually work a kind of we can begin to talk productively across the science-religion divide, because religions have always been in the business of peddling beliefs that afford comfort or courage or promote trust and among people. And those are worthwhile things to promote. But if you're defying evidential norms to do them, I, along with Clifford, think we tend to pay a price for that down the road.
Yeah, so you do side with Clifford on that, as I think I do as well, though I try to be conciliatory about religion, even though I'm an atheist. Would you have to then kind of take a tally of the pluses and minuses of religion? So religious people would say, for example, we live longer, we score higher on the happiness scale, and we recover faster from illnesses, and and so on. And then we counter, oh, that's because of social capital, not religion, or whatever. And that debate goes on and on.
Right.
But so that would be the plus side. Man the soup kitchens, you help the poor. There's a lot of good things that religions do. But there's a lot of bad things. Yes. Of course, as Dawkins famously pointed out, it leads people to fly planes into buildings. So, yes. in a Jamesian kind of pragmatic calculus, would you kind of line them up and say, well, here's the pluses, here's the minuses, and then make a decision that way? Would that be legitimate from a pragmatic perspective?
Yes. So I'm enough of a pragmatist and enough of a Jamesian to think that downstream consequences matter also. And so I think we need that any comprehensive assessment of whether an idea is a good one or worth believing has to attend both to its relationship to evidence and logic, and also pay attention to the causal consequences of relying on that idea. So upstream matters, downstream matters, the logical ramifications matter, the causal implications matter. And I think one thing wise people do is they try to take account of all of the relevant considerations. So in principle, at least, we can study all of an idea's properties, logical and causal, upstream and downstream, and assign to that idea an overall rating, positivity or negativity rating. And of course, these things can get hugely complicated. So we have to simplify and use heuristics. But I think it's true of many forms of delusive ideation that they provide a short-term psychological or social benefit at a long-term collective cost. And if that's your reason for believing in, say, God, I think your reasons are fundamentally selfish and need to be re-examined.
Interesting. Yeah, post 9/11 and the rise of the new atheists, one argument was that, one argument a more conciliatory people would make is, well, what do you care what else someone else believes? Astrology, or Jesus was resurrected, or Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, or whatever, as long as they're not hurting anybody. And the vast majority of religious people don't fly planes into buildings. They don't blow up abortion clinics. They don't shoot up whatever. Anyway, but the argument to counter that was, but they're enabling the extremists by endorsing this invisible guy in the sky and these magical powers and so on. And even though most people don't take it seriously, some do. And by getting the endorsement of the vast majority, that the person that says, well, I'm going to be rewarded with virgins in heaven, and everybody in my religion says there is this heaven and there's these virgins and all this magical stuff goes on, so why can't I believe that? And that would be a counter to that.
Yes. Yeah, but I think if we focus on highly controversial cases of cherished beliefs causing a very tiny percentage of the faithful to fly airplanes into buildings, we tend to just butt heads and not make a whole lot of progress on this. But if we focus on examples like the shipowner case, Clifford's shipowner case, we can begin to carve out some common ground that might allow open minds to open. I like to emphasize the way in which the defiance of evidential norms and the refusal to change your mind in the light of better reason, what I call better reasons. When you begin to defy that norm, you're fundamentally compromising your mind's immune system, because the linchpin of any well-functioning mental immune system is the willingness to change your mind to fit the facts. John Maynard Keynes who said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir?
Yeah, right? One of the great lines. Yeah. Today you'd be a flip-flopper. Mamby-pamby, wishy-washy flip-flopper.
I'll be that kind of flip-flopper any day. Look, the evidence that clinging to your beliefs in the face of contrary evidence is bad for you is very strong. It's called a fixed mindset. So if you treat your beliefs as central to your identity, and you refuse to even consider evidence and questions that might threaten those beliefs, you deprive yourself of growth opportunities. And it turns out that people with a growth mentality are hugely happier on average than people with a fixed mentality. Basically, if you adjust your mind in little increments every time new information comes in, you become a better adjusted person. Surprise, surprise. Right?
So in other words, instead of seeing somebody's counter example or evidence or argument as an attack on you personally and your identity, see it as an opportunity to grow and change and develop and become a better person. That's hard to do.
And it can be very hard to do. And you put it beautifully. I think this relates, I think, in really interesting ways to the immunology metaphor at the heart of the book. It turns out that when you feel threatened, your mind goes on the attack and begins to attack new information. It's almost like when the body's immune system starts to attack your body, right? It's called autoimmunity. A well-functioning bodily immune system attacks genuine threats, but leaves harmless things alone. So I have seasonal allergies. What happens with seasonal allergies is your body's immune system attacks something that's fundamentally harmless, and it's the overreaction to the harmless thing that makes you miserable. The exact same thing can happen to our mental immune systems, where they attack good information instead of bad information. Let me share a story to this effect. I was raised in a family that thought Martin Luther King could walk on water. I mean, he was about as close to a revered person as we had in my family. And then some years later, I learned that Martin Luther King was a serial philanderer who cheated often on his wife. And when I heard this, I very vividly remember what happened. I refused to believe it. I didn't want to believe it. And my mind conjured all of these reasons and questions to reject the threatening information. Oh, this must have been one of J. Edgar Hoover's rumors to smear King. Oh, white supremacists must have pushed this myth and got it out into the memosphere. But it turns out it was good information. It was true. And I actually needed to update my understanding of Martin Luther King. He was a fabulous leader on so many important issues, and he was not faithful to his wife. And those two facts lived together in the same person. And if my mental model of Martin Luther King is going to be accurate and well functioning over the long run, I needed to update it.
How did you do that?
So that was my
just say that in a way he's even more saintly, that he has these human flaws like me, and he still did these great things.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. Yeah. I mean, it can be hard, right, to let go of something that's practically sacred or pure. I mean, we all crave moral exemplars that are pure in some ways. And so I lost that when I learned that about Martin Luther King, when I eventually got around to acknowledging the truth. But the important lesson for me there was that my mind actually has an immune system that can misfire. It can attack the wrong thing. And if you look around at what's happening in today's political world with QAnon and conspiracy theories, those are immune systems that have gone haywire. Those are mental immune systems that are attacking good information and letting in bad information. If you want to understand the root causes of our post-truth predicament, I think you could do a lot worse than analyzing it through the lens of what I call cognitive immunology, the science of mental immunity.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great metaphor, and it works on so many levels to explain things like QAnon. To me, it's the perfect test case because it's so ridiculous, it's so crazy. I mean, if you sat down Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley or Marjorie Taylor Greene and said, alone, do you actually believe there's a secret satanic cult of pedophiles drinking the blood of children, operating a sex trafficking ring out of a Washington, D.C. pizzeria? Do you actually believe that? They would have to say, well, no, of course not. Hopefully they would say that. So when they say they believe it, they tick the box or whatever. What are they actually signaling? Like, I'm so devoted to my tribe that I'm going to publicly state that I believe this crazy idea?
I think that's a big part of it. There's a good bit of research now that suggests that some of the weirdest forms of ideation are actually just ways of signaling tribal loyalty. I mean, you touch on some of this in some of your work, I mean, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley aren't eager to acknowledge their own skepticism about Satan worshiping pedophiles. In part because they don't want to lose their following and their political viability. So they're willing to indulge these delusive claims just for political expedience, right? And in the process, exacerbate our culture's problem, a tenuous grasp on reality.
Yeah. Well, Trump did that when he was asked about QAnon, and he said, "Well, I don't know much about it, but I understand they like me in America, so okay, what's wrong with that?"
Yes,
All right.
yes, yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, and the way Trump just defied norms of accountable talk, I mean, every time he opened his mouth, he basically just asserted he defied standard norms of accountable talk for political expedience, and his base loved him for that, in part, I think, because they feel oppressed by those very norms. When you grow up in a society that expects you to justify your claims and to change your mind I mean, these are enlightened and Enlightenment norms. You grow up in a culture like that, and you're not thriving, but you're aware that those norms are deeply fundamental to where our culture and where it's headed. You fight back against it by defying those norms. And when somebody like Trump comes along and exemplifies that defiance, people flock to it, number one. But I think Trump did enormous damage to the social norm that more than any other promotes human flourishing. And that norm basically says, if you have the better reason, buddy, I'm going to back down. Because if I have the better reason, I want you to back down. Without that norm in place, there's no way to have constructive dialogue. And Trump was trampling that norm on a daily basis.
Yeah, see, here, though, I think if you define your part of your identity by your political party, and, here's the Republican/conservatives, and here's the 10 values that, that we hold: small government, autonomy, pro-business, capitalism, pro-life, and restricted immigration. Just list them off. In a way, you kind of have to endorse all of them, because that's how we're defining our party, and liberals do the same thing on the other side. And so it's a little different than like a scientific theory, where, Big Bang theory, steady state theory, who knows? Okay, now it looks like it's going Big Bang, and okay, it's the Big Bang theory, and everybody just goes, okay, except for the few holdouts that have to die before it gets fully accepted, something like that. The Planck problem, the old guard has to die out before the new theory is fully accepted. But in politics, it feels different to me that that, again, back to the flip-flopper, when it was John Kerry that was called a flip-flopper because he changed his mind on one of the points about being a liberal. And it's like, but that's a good thing. That's what we believe in, changing your mind when the facts change. But the Republicans, of course, pounce on that. Oh, he's a flip-flopper. He can't make up his mind. He believes this, he believes that. We believe a solid set of things, and that's why you should back us.
Yes. And somehow that just the consistency over time of a strongly held set of beliefs many people seem to need that in a time of uncertainty, even though it doesn't serve them well, to remain stubbornly resistant to learning and updating their belief systems. So I think when a culture creates a lot of economic uncertainty and despair, you're going to get these mental immune disorders that cause people to latch on to conspiracy theories and fundamentalist or divisive ideologies and fundamentalisms that otherwise wouldn't flourish. Right? These things flourish in difficult times. So they're deep sort of emotional and psychological needs, I think, that these forms of ideation serve. But if we indulge them, we end up worsening our collective situation. Yeah.
Let's go back to the religion question. Tomorrow I have on my show Stephen Meyer. He's a well-known intelligent design theorist, the return of the God hypothesis. Now, you talk about Dan Dennett's idea of the belief in belief, in which Dan, who's a famous atheist, says, but I understand why other people believe. I believe that they believe, and that in a pragmatic way, that's good for them. Maybe it's good for society, even, who knows. And but I kind of like that, and also some of like Steve Gould's NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria. You guys get those moral values stuff over there, and we get all the factual values about the world. That sounds good, but in a way, it's a little condescending. In a way, it's saying, the little people need religion. You know, they're weak. You know, they're emotionally weak. They're tribal, and they need it. I understand that. You know, but us enlightened people, you know, we're above all this religion stuff, and I guarantee you, Stephen is not going to accept that as like, okay, yeah, let's just make the peace. He's making an argument, 500-page argument for there are factual reasons to believe in God, and you know the fine-tuned arguments about the the cosmological argument, the Kalam argument, the fine-tuning, the genome, you know the constants of the universe. He's got like 10 different things, and he says you should believe this. You should believe that God designed this thing because that's what it looks like, and here's my arguments for why. So if you counter, well, right. I understand why you need to believe. He's not vibing that at all.
Right. And I don't want to write off. I'm passionately devoted to the idea that we can all grow and become more enlightened over time. And I'm not willing to write off a big percentage of humanity as hopelessly deluded and in need of delusions. I don't think that's a recipe for a brighter future. And maybe that means I take it on faith that we're all educable. But
well, you are an educator.
I am an educator, so it kind of yes, that's right. Yes, I mean, so continue on with that thought.
Well, what I'm getting at there is okay. So then, how do we know what's reliable knowledge? That the resurrection really happened, or it's a metaphorical concept, or it's a mythical truth. I've been pounding on this the last few episodes because I had Jordan Peterson on, and I've been thinking about these. Because most Christians, if they didn't believe the resurrection, they wouldn't be Christians. That's what it means to be a Christian. You accept Jesus as the Messiah, and he rose from the dead, and he died for you. You have this discussion from Rebecca Goldstein's the mattering instinct. We need to matter, and that God loves you, you personally. And John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son for you. Well, that does feel good.
Yeah.
Right. So
it does.
But Christians want to say, yeah. But it's not a mythical truth. It's not just what I happen to believe because I was raised Christian. It's really true. It really happened.
Right. And those conversations can be hard to have. I try to, for years I've been conducting kind of just collaborative dialogue between believers and non-believers, between people on the left and people on the right. This group at Carnegie Mellon called the Humanist League, we're dedicated to promoting dialogue over dogma, and we encourage people of faith to come with us and to dialogue with us in the process. And we've had members for years, and still do, for whom their faith doesn't waver, despite very candid, and we always try to keep things constructive and we maintain respect for one another as people, but we also challenge one another's views. So I do believe that respect for people is important, but I don't think it follows that all beliefs are equally worthy of respect. In fact, I'm quite certain that's not.
Right. So then the hard question is how do you know which claim should be accepted as valid knowledge that I should believe versus others that are not? So just take something simple like, climate change, anthropogenic global warming. We kind of reached a consensus in science that, 97% of climate scientists accept this as true. By the, say, early 2000s, maybe 2010 or so, it was pretty absolutely consensus. So, most non-scientists would go, yeah, okay, I accept it as true. And, it's not faith-based, it's confidence that the system works. But it doesn't feel like, say, when you professional philosophers debate free will and determinism, or when Christians and Jews talk about, is Jesus the Messiah or not? And Jews go, no, he's not the Messiah, because in the Old Testament here, it predicts that this is what the Messiah will do and be like. And Jesus of Nazareth wasn't like that, so we don't accept him. And it doesn't feel like there's any more evidence we're going to gather, and then we'll finally have a consensus on free will determinism or the resurrection or whatever.
Yeah, Well, it certainly can't guarantee such a consensus. One of the stories I tell in the book is how the philosophical search for wisdom lost its way. So Socrates basically embodied a certain standard of what a reasonable belief looks like. He would basically test ideas with questions and see if they could withstand questioning. So his standard for reasonable beliefs was can it withstand questioning? If not, it doesn't count for not doesn't it's not knowledge. But if it does withstand questioning, maybe it is. That was his standard. Now it turns out that for very technical reasons in philosophy that the ancients were very aware of, that it's hard to operationalize that definition. And so Plato, Socrates' pupil, experimented with another. He was smitten by mathematics, and he loved the idea that true knowledge is basically grounded in a kind of proof. So, in place of Socrates' can it withstand questioning standard, he proposed the can we provide a sufficiently good proof for the claim standard. Now, that model of reasonable belief that Plato proposed actually leads you down a very deep philosophical rabbit hole. And more importantly, if you internalize that standard, you start looking for the reasons to validate the beliefs you have. In other words, it exacerbates what we now call confirmation bias. So Plato's model of reason, the one that has basically prevailed in epistemological inquiry for over 2,000 years, exacerbates confirmation bias. And the way out of that trap is to go back to the Socratic model and go back to testing ideas with questions and weeding out the ones that can't withstand those rigorous questioning.
So would it be something like a climate scientist would say, I want to listen to my strongest critics. Ask me the toughest questions you got. And let me see how my theory stands.
That's the scientific attitude in a nutshell, I think. That you can't do science well if you say, okay, I'm going to look at these 3 or 4 reasons that favor my theory, but I'm going to ignore all of the reasons you might give against my theory. That's not the scientific attitude. That becomes just an exercise in dogma reinforcement, right? And I see this again and again among my religious friends. They're so attached to certain ideas that, if I can find a few reasons why I think the resurrection was real, and I cling tightly enough to those reasons, then it doesn't matter how many objections you can raise about the reliability of the witnesses on the 3 days after the crucifixion, or anything like that. Because, so to some extent, they use the Platonic model of reason to grasp more firmly to the beliefs they want to hang on to. Another principle of this emerging science of what I call cognitive immunology is that willful belief corrupts the mind's immune system. So if you believe because you want to, you might think you can get away with that in certain little corners of your life and it won't spread and infect your way of thinking about other things. But the evidence is mounting that that's not true. You indulge in willful believing in religion, and you start to indulge in willful believing about politics. And then you start to indulge in wishful thinking about what happens in the basement of pizza parlors in Washington, D.C., right? It's a slippery slope.
So is this the basis of James's book, The Will to Believe?
James, so I end up arguing that James, who's well-loved among scientifically minded philosophers, I argue that James got this fundamentally wrong, that he was defending the will to believe in a way that would make not just Clifford turn over in his grave, but that would also make James's hero, Charles Sanders Peirce, turn over in his grave. Peirce said quite specifically, we have to learn not to indulge in willful belief. And I think Peirce was on to some of the core principles about how to strengthen mental immune systems. He was not happy with the direction James was taking pragmatism. So I actually tell the story in the book of how James kidnapped Peirce's intellectual baby, pragmatism, and took it in a direction he didn't want it to go. In fact, Peirce said in a snarky comment, I've had enough of these literary types who have kidnapped my ideas." Right? He felt as though his philosophy had been kidnapped by William James. And although he needed James's support and admired James for other reasons, he decided not to make an issue of it. And so few people have noticed this deep schism within the philosophical tradition of pragmatism, where its founder, Peirce, said, we must outgrow our adolescent desire to believe things because we want to. And James came right back and defended willful believing to the detriment, I think, of us all.
So let's think of some examples of that. Would it be reasonable to say, well, I'm pro-choice on the abortion issue, and here's my reasons. Now you give me your pro-life reasons, and I listen to those, and I say, well, yeah, those are good arguments, but you know what? I'm still pro-choice. It's never going to be ultimately resolved by some experiment or something. And we have to draw the line somewhere because we have laws and so forth. So you have your beliefs, I have my beliefs. Now, is that reasonable? Is that justified knowledge that pro-choice is my position, you're a pro-lifer, and we're never going to change our minds, or maybe we will, but it's okay at least provisionally to say that's my truth or my belief?
Yes. So for years, I had the privilege of facilitating dialogue about the ethics of abortion in my philosophy classroom. And it's fascinating. If you really listen to people on the other side and try to understand their reasons and patiently present your own reasons and ask them to be similarly patient and similarly attentive to yours, I think worldviews on both sides, value systems on both sides, start to get more nuanced, and actually, and the common ground, which can initially be minor, small, actually begins to grow. So, for example, I've had students who say, it's just really important that we treat life as sacred, and if we don't draw the line here when it comes to fetal life, it's just a slippery slope before we begin devaluing one another. One way to approach somebody like that is to say, I agree with you. It's really important that we treat life as sacred, and even fetal life deserves, the interests of fetal life need to be taken into account also. I'm the kind of pro-life person who's prepared to concede that the mother's interests are not the only ones that matter. I do think that 6, 7, 8-month fetuses have enough going on that we can reasonably argue that they have interests that are morally relevant and that ought to be weighed in the calculus. That sounds cold and calculated.
Well, but in fact, a pregnant woman who's, say, 8 months pregnant, like Lacey Peterson was, and then she's killed. That was a double homicide, at least in the state of California. I don't know other states, but that fetus is a person, legal person.
Yeah, and I don't know much about that particular case. I do know that if you shift the question from should fetal life be protected to should abortion be criminalized, and you ask pro-life people to reflect hard on whether they really want to imprison or punish women who choose abortion, a lot of times they start to waver. I mean, so I think a lot of evangelical pro-life advocacy has been drumming the importance of protecting fetal life into the minds of, say, the religious right. I think a conversation with a person like that can be productive would go like this. I acknowledge to you that fetal life is important. I acknowledge that whenever possible, human life should be treated as sacred and precious. But do you really think it's a good idea to execute a young woman who was pregnant due to rape because she chose to get an abortion. Do you really think that's a good idea? And give them time to think about that. Are you really serious about criminalizing the choice of abortion? Or are you just saying that you'd like those of us on the left to acknowledge that fetal life matters too? Because I'm willing to do the latter, but do you really think the former is a good idea?
Yeah, I do something similar with when I talk to conservatives that are pro-lifers, and I try to shift the conversation to not abortion, but unwanted pregnancies. That's the problem, not abortion. Why are women getting pregnant when they don't want to? Well, now we can talk about practical things, education, access to birth control and healthcare and economic independence and prosperity and so on. And, you know, when those conditions are there, women are less likely to get pregnant when they don't want to, and therefore abortion rates do go down. There's studies showing this. But that's really more of a kind of a pragmatic or a practical way of talking about it and finding common ground between people. But as an epistemologist, can we say that there is no correct answer on the abortion issue? We've you know, after all these decades of 20th century modern debate on the subject, and we've got two positions. And those are the two positions. That's it. It's never going to be one position. It's not going to be 6 different positions or whatever. It's just 2. So those are the 2, at least provisionally, truths in this matter, moral truths or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly willing to grant that the final answer on the abortion question is extremely difficult to arrive at and demonstrate to the satisfaction of reasonable people from different life circumstances. But I deplore the tendency to say, oh, well, it's all just subjective.
Yeah, of course.
So this is something right. People often do when faced with really ticklish moral questions. Oh, well, value questions are just subjective. After all, the only way anything has value is if we just arbitrarily choose to give it value. That's, I think, extremely, in fact, I argue that that's what I call a mental immune disruptor. If you're in the habit of thinking about values as merely subjective or arbitrary, you're going to miss out on the kind of deep philosophical conversations that can enrich your value set and deepen your value set.
Yeah, so let's go through those 6. I really like those. I wrote them down. 6 immune disruptive ideas. So these are challenges to your cognitive immune system. 1, beliefs are private and no one else is concerned. Basically says, I can believe whatever I want. 2, we have a right to believe what we like. 3, values are subjective. You just said. 4, we have no standing to criticize other people's values. 5, basic value commitments are not subject to rational assessment. And 6, questioning a person's core commitments is fundamentally intolerant. Yes, you hear this a lot these days. It's sort of a postmodern attitude about truth, which I think has gone too far.
And you can make, and the interesting thing about these 6 ideas is that you can make a pretty good prima facie case, or on the face of it case, that each of the 6 is true. And each has gained a wide degree of cultural currency, in part because of that. But it turns out that at least 4 of the 6, I think 5 of the 6, have a key ambiguity. And when you clarify and remove that ambiguity, you begin to see how the idea serves us poorly. So let me give an example. Take the idea that everyone is entitled to their opinion. Now, that idea has a long history, and liberals and conservatives alike have embraced it. It's pretty much close to orthodoxy. But there's a key ambiguity there. I think it's a good idea, for the most part, not to criminalize opinion holding. So we should have a legal right to hold our opinions. But that doesn't follow from that we have a moral right to indulge in misogynistic delusions or white supremacist fantasies. Those are morally unconscionable views, and you're not entitled to them. Not if we're talking morally. So we need to get past the idea, and yet the idea that we're entitled to our opinion continues to excuse irresponsible believing throughout our culture and inhibit the kind of self-examination that would allow us to grow into a healthier culture together.
So just to put a fine point on that with an example. So the right of a white supremacist to march and say the Jews will not replace us, he should be legally protected as long as no violence ensues from his march. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't stand up and say, no, you're wrong about this. Your beliefs about the Jews are simply wrong. And worse than wrong, they're really immoral. And here's why they're immoral.
That's right.
And okay, so then
that's right.
Then as an epistemologist, how do you justify that you have an objective truth on a moral question, like bigotry and prejudice is morally wrong, like slavery is wrong or whatever, and somebody else says, well, yeah, but that's just Western culture, and that's that weird WEIRD, Western educated industrial democratic, yes, and so on. But other cultures are different. So maybe an example would be like, I don't like it that women wear the burqa. I feel that's restraining and it kind of goes against women's rights. To which my liberal friends would say, well, or somebody would say, it's none of your business what women wear. Maybe in Eastern cultures, they feel that Western women running around in bikinis is just as bad or worse. So it's better to be covered up and be, yes, modest, given men's impulses, right, and so on. But then I would push it and go, okay, what about female genital mutilation? And then most people back down there and go, well, no, that doesn't seem right because the women are not choosing that. It's imposed on them.
Right.
So here you get, where do you draw the line and say, well, one is really objectively morally wrong and the other one is a cultural tradition?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things here that prevent us from making real headway, I think, on this issue. One of them is the idea that values are ultimately subjective. So if you have that view, you end up saying, well, you believe this, I believe that. What's the point in debating it? Because it's all ultimately arbitrary. So if you're looking for a way to cut short philosophical conversation, that idea is going to do it for you every time. Another way to express that idea is, who's to say? Who's to say if abortion is right or abortion is wrong? Who's to say if forcing women to wear a burqa is right or wrong? So conversational maneuvers like that actually prevent us from delving deeper and actually deepening our understanding. Here, it helped on the question of how can any values be shown to be objective. It helps to start with some very simple examples. Think about kindness versus cruelty. I happen to think, as a secular naturalist, I happen to think that morality is ultimately a set of rules designed to promote our welfare. Now, here's the thing about kindness. Kindness is an objectively more reliable promoter of shared welfare than cruelty is. Imagine two people. Imagine the following argument: I like kindness. I like cruelty. Oh, well, who's to say? I guess it's all just subjective. That seems silly, right? Because kindness really is objectively more reliable promoter of
unless you're a masochist and you like pain.
Well,
so we'll take those out of the equation.
Okay. Edge cases aside, but yeah, you get the point, though,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And you can say the exact same thing about honesty and dishonesty, or fairness and unfairness. Being just and fair promotes our shared well-being more than being unjust and unfair. Being honest is objectively more reliable contributor to our shared welfare than being dishonest. So when it comes to very core values, you can construct objective demonstrations of why they're important. Uh, and once you accept the idea that objective considerations can help us decide value questions or moral questions, then you can begin to learn very rapidly from what I call value inquiry or value discourse. But you really can't learn much from value discourse if you don't shed those immune disruptive ideas first.
Yeah, so this kind of overlap of facts and values, science and morality, ought from is, the naturalistic fallacy and all that. Like the examples you just gave, it's pretty simple and obvious. We can collect data on that scientifically. You can just ask people, would you rather be treated kindly or cruelly? They'll tell you.
Yeah.
Would you rather live in a democracy? Would you rather live in North Korea or South Korea? Would you rather live in East Germany or West Germany? And people vote. Right. They vote with their feet. We know from social science what people prefer. So I think we can even go farther than just saying, well, here's some moral philosophical arguments against slavery. Just ask the slave, what would you rather be? And
ask the woman who in a Muslim country if she wants to be confined to wearing a burqa for her entire life or not.
Maybe they say
that's what she chooses.
So here's the harder one. So let's say a woman is raised from a young girl to being, you should be modest, you should cover up and so forth. And then as adults, pollsters go in and say, do you like to wear the burqa? Yes, I like to wear the burqa. I'm honored to wear the burqa. And I'm not forced. My husband's not making me doing it. I'm choosing to do it. Now, a Westerner may say, well, she's kind of brainwashed, right? She's sort of raised that way. And it's a little bit like my analogy I use is the fundamentalist Mormons that live up in Utah and northern Colorado, in those little polygamous communities that apparently are not illegal because they just marry the one wife and the others are sister wives, right? And I've seen some of it. My wife and I watched that funny show. It's kind of funny, but the women are all like, "Oh yeah, we're digging it. We love this. My sister wives, and we get the one guy, and so forth, and hilarity ensues as he tries to navigate the complexity of 7 wives or whatever." But but serious, like when pollsters go in, they'll often say, "Yes, I like being a sister wife." Yeah, but they don't know any different. They from the age of 5, they were told, that old guy over there, he's going to be your husband. And like, okay. I mean, what does a 5-year-old know? So they don't have moral culpability in the sense that, they don't know the choices available.
And I think there's an argument here for not indoctrinating any child into any view until they've reached a certain level of maturity and the capacity to assess ideas. I think John Stuart Mill called it the age of reason. He estimated it at age 18 or something. And until a kid, a relatively non-brainwashed kid reaches the age of 18, you can't treat their religious choices, their political affiliations, or anything else as freely chosen in a way. And I mean, Saint Francis Xavier, the Jesuit, I think 17th century, 18th century Jesuit, said, "Give me a child for the first 6 years, and you can do what you like with him after." His point was, those are the formative years, and you can make a kid believe in Easter bunnies, tooth fairies, anything if you can monopolize their attention during those years. Now, one of the interesting things about the internet is that it's getting very hard to monopolize anybody's attention anymore. It's hard to create information bubbles and to police their boundaries.
Well, here, Dawkins makes that point about raising a religious child as a form of child abuse because they don't know any different. And his analogy is you think of a Catholic child or a Baptist child or a Jewish child, but you wouldn't think of a Keynesian child or a Marxist child. It just sounds ridiculous. And yet parents feel that, say, religious beliefs are different than political beliefs in how they raise their kids, maybe.
I like Dawkins' point a lot there, and I'd want to be pretty ecumenical in its application. it doesn't seem to me we should be drilling Keynesianism into kids until they're 18, any more than we should be drilling our religious preferences into them. Um, and here, I think there's a real alternative to this, right? That you can raise kids into a community of inquiry instead of into a community of belief, right? So when you come to identify with a community that shapes its identity around beliefs, you will defend those beliefs sometimes to the death, and you'll turn with disdain on any information that threatens them. But we know that that compromises healthy thinking and mental immune function. So the antidote to that is to welcome people into communities of inquiry and encourage everyone to hold their beliefs lightly. So I have this thing I call the house guest heuristic. So many people treat their beliefs as like heirloom furniture to be hung on to generation after generation. And fellow human beings who might challenge those beliefs are like the house guests that who have worn out their welcome by questioning them, right? I recommend flipping that on its head. Treat the people who question you as people we need to coexist with in perpetuity on this planet, and treat your beliefs as the house guests that might wear out their welcome at any time. If you're not willing to let go of beliefs when it's time to learn and move beyond them, I mean, beliefs can function well for a time, but after you've internalized the lessons they have to teach, a lot of times you need to replace them with a more nuanced model of the way reality is, or a more nuanced sense of right and wrong. And at that point, beliefs become counterproductive. They become an obstacle to your own growth as a human being. So I urge everyone to hold their beliefs lightly and always be on the lookout for indications that they might have reached the limits of their usefulness.
Yeah, I'm reminded of stories over the last couple of months of couples, marriages that have broken up over QAnon and or the larger, rigged election. Are you pro-Trump, anti-Trump, whatever? And it's like, really, yes. You're drawing the line at your marriage? I mean, that's divorce is huge. It's massively disruptive. Over a QAnon conspiracy theory? Yes, so this has happened. So that would be good advice. Yeah. Carry it lightly. Now, but to push back on that, let's say a conservative may say, well, I don't carry my conservative values lightly, and for good reason. The kind of things that we believe in, marriage and family and flag and nationalism and and small government, all the characteristics of the conservative, that they may respond, why would I hold that lightly? Those are core values. They're super important. And I want to raise my children with those values, that wait to have sex until you get married, don't get pregnant, get a job, and work hard. And, all the kind of talking points that you hear on Fox News every night. Okay, those are good values. Sure. All right. Why would I carry those lightly?
Yeah. Well, if you're interested in growing and seeing nuance where you didn't see it before, that would be one reason to hold them lightly. There's also this research coming out of mindset theory that fixed mindsets actually make you less well-adjusted as a human being. So cling to your beliefs, but you may gain a short-term sense of emotional security or a sense of purpose or the sense that you matter or the sense that you're on the side of the angels. But you're kind of eating your own seed corn, because not only are you depriving yourself of a chance to enrich your worldview. I mean, the evidence suggests that rigid worldviews make people less happy, less well-adjusted, less well-educated, less successful.
Even on core, right down the line. Even on core values, you mean?
I don't think that. So take the core value of family. I think a lot of right-wing fearmongers have been whipping stories about I don't know, binary people or homosexual marriage into a threat to the traditional institution of marriage. I think there's a whole lot of scaremongering going on there. And 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 one way you can, I mean, propagandists and ideologues have known for decades that you can basically hack a mind's immune system with fear, with disdain. So when Trump describes his liberal opponents with disdain in his voice, turns out that's a very powerful way to inoculate Republican minds against what Democrats want to teach, want to help people understand. And this goes back. So one of the early pieces of research underlying the science of mental immunity is the work of a guy named William McGuire. He actually wanted to understand how you can create resistance to persuasion. So when the Korean War ended with an armistice, 9 American POWs decided to stay in North Korea rather than return to America. And the U.S. military establishment was up in arms. Why would anybody choose to do this? They could live here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Why would they stay in a dictatorship? And so they assumed that the North Koreans must have advanced brainwashing techniques. So they allocated a bunch of money to study resistance to brainwashing. And William McGuire became kind of a leading researcher in that field. What he found was fascinating. He found that if you expose a mind to a weakened form of an argument, a lot of times it'll develop resistance to even very strong and valid versions of that same argument.
Like a vaccine.
And disdain functions the same. Say again?
Like a vaccine.
It's like a vaccine. That's right. So he called it inoculation theory. And this was one of the first bits of concrete evidence that the mind does, in fact, have an immune system. But 60 years have gone by, and I'm not aware of anybody else who's coming right out and making the direct factual claim that minds do actually have mental immune systems, and they can fail, and we can hack, and people can hack them, and we can hack them for good as well as for evil, for nefarious purposes. In the same way that immunologists use vaccines to hack our body's immune systems and make them stronger, cognitive immunologists are coming up with mind vaccines that can make our mental immune system stronger.
Yeah, let's go through some of those. At the end of your book, you have your 12-step program, which I like. So these are okay. these are steps to inoculate your mind against bad ideas, right? Or being too fixed mind. So one, play with ideas. Yes. Play with ideas. So that's your light touch. Just kind of entertain lots of ideas as if it's more interesting or a game rather than defining yourself by one of them.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think when we start taking ideas too seriously, we start to get defensive and angry, and so engaging one another in a kind of a playful form of dialogue is an excellent way to strengthen your mind's immune system. The other thing about that particular point is that ideas are not passive content for the mind. They reshape the mind. When you take on an idea and make it your own, your mind changes. Your mind changes in such a way that ideas can delude and seduce and addict and confuse and disorient. They're not. We need to get over the idea that our minds are agents and their contents are merely inert. Ideas are alive in much the way that viruses are alive.
Yeah, that's your second point. Minds are not passive knowledge receptacles, right? We engage with those. You have another point here. I like distinguish between good and bad faith, by which I think you mean assume that the other person is engaging with you in good faith. He really wants to know, and you should in turn engage with other people in good faith. That is, you're being genuine. So there's actually an expression called jacking off, just asking questions. and 9/11 truthers do this to me all the time. I'm not committed to anything. I'm just asking questions. How could Building 7 have fallen? It's like, okay, I see where this is going. Or, climate deniers. Okay, yeah. I don't know much about that, but I just, like Columbo, I just have this one little question here, but they're not actually acting in good faith. They're trying to draw you down a particular pathway. So here would be a backfire of your Socratic method, right? Socrates mean what you mean is a genuine good faith questioning, not pulling you down some pathway.
Yeah, I mean, and those of us who love critical thinking have liked the idea that we should question everything for a long time. But it turns out there's a very technical problem in philosophy called the regress problem. And if you question everything, including every premise that somebody else might bring forward in proof of their claim, you can get them to keep extending their argument further and further. And because you can always ask, well, how do you know that? In principle, an argument can never come to an end. That's called the regress problem. So it turns out that questions can be weaponized, just as reasons can be weaponized. And you can abuse the privilege of asking questions, just as you can use reasons to bludgeon a dialectical opponent. But if you bring that martial attitude to conversation, you rob it of its power to truly enlighten. And in fact, you're probably undermining your own ability to think clearly and in a fair-minded way.
Yeah, you have upgrade your understanding of reasonable belief, which I think is kind of a Bayesian way of thinking, which I like. And I think science actually operates more Bayesian than Popperian falsification. Most scientists are not trying to falsify their cherished beliefs. They want to find evidence to fit them. They just know that their colleagues are going to debunk them if they can, so they have to be careful. But really, when they're running experiments, they're hoping to, gather more and more evidence to support it, like anthropogenic global warming. Look, we have these multiple lines of independent inquiry from different labs and scientists and study different fields. They're all drawing to this one conclusion. So the credence of the AGW being true goes way up because of all these priors we keep adjusting as we conduct more experiments. And so it's not just a matter of, well, we haven't falsified it yet, but let's see. The flip of that is, no, we're actually gaining more and more confidence as we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, at a very simple level, traditional epistemology treats everything as illegitimate until proven to be legitimate, or unjustified until proven to be justified. So the burden of proof is always on the claimant in traditional Platonic epistemology. Popper kind of flips that on his head and basically says, well, anything can be considered as a bold conjecture and is therefore, default innocent to that degree, but then the burden is on the critic to falsify it. So Popper basically flipped it upside down. But on my view, both of those models of how reasoning and science go are hugely oversimplified and indiscriminate. It turns out that actual practicing scientists take a much more Bayesian approach, where the burden of proof shifts in much more subtle ways than either of those two epistemological theories imagined.
Yeah, for example, to Stephen Meyer on the theory of evolution, the burden of proof is no longer on us scientists to prove evolution. It's true that's been settled for a century. When Darwin published The Origin of Species, the burden of proof was on him. Okay, let's see what you got. And that's why he wrote this massive tome, right? So that can shift depending on who's, I guess,
that's right.
Not just dominant, but dominant for a good reason, that there's been this competitive nature amongst the experts in the field trying to debunk each other. And once, we consume the consensus through some paper, some white paper or some published paper, it's like, okay. So the example I like to use is I don't know anything about quantum physics or string theory or whatever. So when I encounter some debate and I wonder, well, I wonder if this is something we should publish in Skeptic, that we should be skeptical of string theory or whatever. I call my friends that do this for a living and say, okay, what's the deal? Is there really a debate here? Or what's the problem? Because I don't know, but they know. I assume they know. And it's not an argument from authority or faith. It's that I know the system is pretty competitive and, they weed each other's bad ideas out. They catch fraud. And so most scientific fraud is exposed by graduate students or colleagues. and the inside, right? So, I trust the system in a way.
Yeah, one of the real glories of science is that it treats knowledge testing and knowledge creation as a team sport. No one of us can generate enough in the way of challenges or objections to fully test an interesting idea. But if we work on it together and we check out your objections as well as mine, we can go a lot farther in the direction of weeding out bad ideas. So when an entire community of scientists all gets together and tests a hypothesis, by the time they're done, the hypothesis has really been worked over pretty well. And if it's withstood the questioning, we owe it, at the very least, we owe it to them and their efforts to treat their findings as what I call presumptions, as things that sure look solid for now, and unless somebody comes along with a really good reason to shake it, we should treat it as true. But of course, you never know, never say never, right? Even Newton's theory of gravity ended up being modified by Einstein much later.
Yes. So J.B.S. Haldane was famously asked, what would it take to change your mind about evolution or refute the theory of evolution? And he said, fossil rabbits in the Precambrian. Well, what if we did? What if we did find fossil rabbits in the Precambrian? Well, if there was one paper or one claim about this, I'd be suspicious because there's so much evidence to the contrary that, and Steve Gould has a funny story he used to tell about that Duane Gish would quote from this geology textbook, a legitimate accepted geology textbook, about driving along Highway 70 through Colorado. And if you pull over at mile marker such and such, and you look at the road cut, and you see that the older beds are on top of the younger beds, and Gish stopped the quote there, and then goes on and say, you see, these geologists, they don't know what they're talking about, right? But Gould says, but if you continue reading from the textbook, it says, but if you get out of your car and you walk over, you can see the thrust beds that pushed up and flipped the bedding so that the older beds were on top of the younger beds. And so his point was, right, if you have this one thing, well, maybe you should get out of the car and double check because, it's so contrary to what, not just what we're confident in, but that, has accumulated evidence in favor of. So just one experiment is not going to do it.
I love that story. That's really terrific. We now have a pretty, it sounds like we have a pretty plausible model of how a rock bed can be turned over by geological forces and thereby derange the usual sequencing, right? Is that am I understanding?
That's correct. Yes. Right. Yeah. So you got to get out of your car. And then the other point there, Naomi Oreskes makes this point about how science actually operates. That one peer-reviewed experiment paper is not going to overturn a whole field. So I had her on the podcast and used this example of, the replication crisis really started with this famous ESP experiment. Daryl Bem did this experiment about backward causality, in which these subjects appeared to be slightly above chance in their kind of extrasensory perception of the image that was about to pop up on the screen before the random number generator even determined which one was going to come up on the left or right side of the screen. And to make it even more interesting, these were pornographic pictures. So Stephen Colbert called this extrasensory pornception. Anyway, but the point of the story is that, believers would always say, come on, skeptics, what's it going to take for you to change your mind? And we say, okay, you got to have a rigorous, controlled experiment conducted by, in a real lab with real scientists published in a peer-reviewed journal. Well, Daryl Bem is one of the most famous experimental psychologists published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, one of the highest ranked of all journals. There it is. Okay, Shermer, are you a believer now? It's like, no, but why am I not a believer? And it turns out, because this is one of those failed to replicate experiments, and that he ran 9 different experiments, but only published 2 of them. And, just sort of the file drawer problem. And 2 other scientists tried to replicate it and they couldn't. And there were problems with the protocols and so on. So the peer review system itself is not going to guarantee reliable knowledge. You'd have to have like multiple replications and Anyway, the whole
Right.
replication crisis is filled with these kind of cutesy psychological experiments. Like, if you have a clean desktop on your computer, you donate more money to charity. Or if you're at the top of the escalator versus the bottom of the escalator, you donate more money. Or if you hold a warm cup of coffee versus a cold glass of water, you assess people as warm or cold by their personality. None of these things, or the power pose, if you stand up with your chin up and back, you'll ask for a raise and your testosterone will go. None of these things replicated, right? So you got to have multiple data points there.
Fascinating. Well, and going back to your question about why didn't you believe that the ESP experiment demonstrated it? I think part of the reason you were right to be skeptical was that we don't have anything close to a plausible working model of how a mind might know things by ESP, right? All we have is correlational stuff at most, some of which can't be replicated. So, if and when we end up finding out that brains can directly perceive waves from the future or from a random number generator, until something like that happens, I think we're right to be skeptical of such.
Yeah, though there's a question then, to what extent a scientific theory could be accepted without a underlying mechanism to explain it, like plate tectonics eventually became the mechanism of continental drift. But that wasn't really why it wasn't accepted. And of course, Darwin's theory was accepted long before Crick and Watson discovered DNA. And then there's the underlying mechanism for what natural selection is operating on. So it's possible to get there without the mechanism, although it helps to have it.
Well, and I think one of the big objections to Newton's theory of gravity way back in the day was, you haven't given us a mechanism for how masses attract each other. And he was like, I don't know how they do it, but they do. And he was right.
I feign no hypothesis, right? Yes. Right. Well, so one of Einstein's big ideas was that there is no force. It's just the bending of space and time. That was pretty mind-blowing.
Right.
Yeah. So, that's another big question here that I had reading your book was, a lot of times these immune systems shield us from correct ideas that we have a hard time accepting. Like say Einstein, not overturning, but modifying Newton. Or here I was thinking when I was reading your book of the theory about the cause of ulcers. And I forget the name of the scientist that said, actually, I don't think it's lifestyle and stress. I think it's the virus. It's like a virus. How would a virus cause an ulcer? And he had a lot of resistance. Same thing with Semmelweis about, washing your hands so you don't get puerperal fever, during childbirth. And his colleagues said, wash your hands. That's crazy. We don't need to do that, because they didn't have a germ theory of disease, right? So their ideological immune system blocked them from understanding the right idea.
Yeah. And so it turns out that our minds and the way in which they handle new information is enormously complicated. And the very mechanisms that protect us against bad information are sometimes mobilized to blot out good information. And vice versa. I think, Michael, you said at one point, maybe in one of your books about belief, that there are two ways our minds can misfire. We can block out a falsehood.
Yeah, type 1 and type 2 errors.
We can block out a truth or let in a falsehood, and both are type 1 and type 2 errors. Yeah, I think that's the perfect analogy with an overactive and an underactive mental immune system, right? An overactive mental immune system will block out good information, and an underactive one will let in bad information.
Yeah, so two of your points in your 12-step program address this. Let go of the idea that value judgments can't be objective. No, that's not the one. Treat challenges to your belief as opportunities rather than threats, and satisfied your need for belonging with a community of inquiry rather than belief. So there, let's find common ground, like between the pro-lifers and the pro-choicers. What is it we have in common? Well, we both want to reduce the number of abortions, right? Well, okay, then back to why are women getting abortions? Because they don't want to get pregnant. They didn't want to get pregnant. Well, why not? okay, here's, some practical reason. Then you and I can work on this problem together rather than, you're a conservative and I'm a liberal and I define myself by these beliefs, so it's a war.
And so that's a lovely example of how two people on opposite sides of a deeply divisive issue can come together, work on practical ways to reduce the size of a problem while getting to know one another, and moving in the direction of an outlook that would allow them to address the deep fundamental philosophical differences between them. Right? Sometimes it takes years to work through deep differences, and if you can focus on the things that serve both of our interests and serve both of our values in the meantime, that's a good way to compromises that allow us to get on with the task of living together and getting to know one another better. Often time is the best way to heal these deep ideological divides.
Yeah. We think in the kind of the long moral arc of civilization that there's certain truths that are coming out, like slavery is objectively wrong. As Lincoln famously said, if slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. And, torture, capital punishment, even though a handful of states here still practice it, it's on its way out. Torture is abolished, supposedly, in most countries. And, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, workers' rights, children's rights, these, we've kind of come to agreement that these are truths that we embrace, not just subjective values, that they really are true. But when you pull away from there to the dicier issues, like what's the right answer on immigration? How many people should we let in? Or what's the right upper tax bracket rate? It's 37% now. Biden's getting hammered to say, well, let's make it 39%. This is nothing. It used to be 70%. I mean, he's not a socialist for saying 39%. But what's the number? Is it 41%, 50%, 22%, no income tax? What? To me, these feel different than these others.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if questions like this had easy answers or easy solutions, but I just don't. I think reality is too complicated for that, and we need to reconcile ourselves to that. The fact that it might take years or even generations to resolve a deep moral question like abortion, or the fact that it might take lots of many years to bring people together on the topic of immigration, doesn't mean that there isn't an ideal solution. It just means that it's damn hard to find, and it takes patience and understanding and above all, listening skills to get there.
Yeah, well, some people would argue, because I've made this argument before, they go, well, no, the objective truth we're seeking is a fair and just society with universal health care, maternity leave, and, they rattle off all the things that the kind of entitlement state, welfare state, whatever you want to call it, that we've been moving toward all democracies for a century now. You have Pinker's book back there. He was shocked to discover that, all of them, including America, have about 19 to 20% of their GDP allocated for entitlements. And some as high as, like 29%, I think is the highest, France maybe. But all of them. And so liberals and conservatives can argue all they want about it should be higher, it should be lower. But it's never going to go, just 1 or 2 points up or down. We've kind of merged to converge to this. We have a moral obligation to help people that can't help themselves, the homeless and food stamps and so on and so forth. This is what enlightened democracies do. This is what we're going to do. And so the left and right just kind of argue about little minutia, although they treat it like it's life and death. It's capitalism versus communism when you're really arguing about like 1 percentage point difference. It's good. What Freud called that the narcissism of small differences, right? But anyway, so that gets to your kind of having that open mindset and rather than rigid dogmatic beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, I really think we need to. So in the same way that the body's immune system can become, go into overdrive and just freak out, in the same way, a culture's immune system. It's, in other words, the kind of conversations we use to resolve our differences can actually be thought of as like a cultural immune system. We talk together and we try to toss out the bad ideas and keep the good ones. But when political discourse becomes highly charged and we treat each other as enemies, that breaks down, and our culture's ability to settle on either good policies or at least workable policies gets damaged in the process. And so, if you asked me what's the root cause of our supreme partisanship and political dysfunction right now, it ultimately goes back, I think, to mental and cultural immune disorders that are a result of decades of abuse and neglect. We just haven't been caring for mental immune systems the way we need to if we're going to live together in constructive ways in an internet connected age.
You need to have Dr. Fauci endorse your book. Get this vaccine right now for your mind, or whoever the equivalent of Dr. Fauci would be.
Connect me with Anthony. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we've been going almost an hour and a half, and I need to wrap up, and I know you're super busy. But I wanted to ask you one last kind of overarching question that I don't have the answer to, because I don't know if there is an answer. But to what extent humans are by nature kind of gullible and suckers for cults and crazy beliefs and conspiracy theories and whatnot, or are we naturally kind of skeptical, and it's really hard to convince people to join a cult or believe in some kind of crazy conspiracy theory?
The essay that started me down this path to writing this book was an essay written by Richard Dawkins called Viruses of the Mind. And in that, Dawkins likens a 4-year-old child to an immune-compromised adult. He pointed out that a 4-year-old, if you tell a 4-year-old that the Easter Bunny exists, they'll believe you. And he said that their minds were born gullible, which is to say our mental immune systems are not developed enough to screen out patent falsehoods. And he said there's an analogy here with sort of immune compromised adults. And he just mentioned that in passing and then goes off in a different direction. But that passage stuck with me, and I was like, there's got to be something here. I think minds really do have immune systems. They really can fail to function properly, either because we're born gullible or because they get compromised by, say, fear mongering, right? And so we actually need to learn. We need a science of mental immunity, so we understand how mental immune systems work, and we need to figure out how to make them work better, so that epidemics of unreason don't compromise the future for our children and grandchildren.
Well, that's a good place to end it. I'll read the last paragraph from your wonderful book here. Martin Luther King once said that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. To this, I would add, where we uphold reason's fulcrum, it bends the faster. And you can help bend that arc. All you need is information that others have overlooked, the expectations that others take account of it, and the will to change minds. Of course, you must be willing to let others change your mind. That's the price of admission, the willingness to learn. We merit the courage of our convictions only when we have the courage to part with them. Man, that's good writing, Andy. Good job. I love the book. Thank you for your work.
Thank you,
thanks
Michael.
for coming on the show. What's next on your plate? What are you working on for your next big project?
Well, I'm going to be talking about this with Joe Rogan in a couple of weeks.
Oh, good. Good.
That'll be fun. And I'm actually thinking about developing my ideas on the human need to matter and how we can do a better job collectively to serve the human need to matter.
Boy, I think that's important because as the number of nuns grows, that is, religion declines, people are going to be searching for something to replace it with.
I believe you mentioned Rebecca Goldstein's work on mattering earlier. I think she's argued very persuasively that religion serves the human need to matter in ways that secular worldviews have not yet been able to match. So I'd like to help develop a naturalistic outlook that gives us a deep sense that we matter, so that we can begin to flourish in ways that until now we haven't.
Is that what the Humanism Initiative at Carnegie Mellon does? Something along those lines?
Something like that. Yeah, we think that involvement in a community of inquiry and in a community of people who I mean, look, the religious congregations provide belonging, and belonging is one of the powerful ways to meet your need to matter. If you matter to people who matter to you, you feel like you matter, full stop. So belonging to community, I think we need much more community of inquiry and much less community of belief. And I think we need to do that to stop being at each other's throats about political, theological, and economic differences.
Well, reading your book is a good place to start. Let's hope everybody gets their hands on this. That'd be great. All right, Andy, thanks so much. That was a great conversation. Such an interesting concept, ideological immunity, mental immunity. Great.
I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I look forward to talking again, Michael. It's been a pleasure.